participant or guest, welcome to the second session. And I'm very happy that she made it, that the storm brought you from one island to another island. And so, am I too... Okay, let's try. It was like a difficult task to get this mic to the position. Okay, it's working. So our next speaker will be Dagmara Budzioch. Okay, well pronounced. Okay, so and I'm personally happy to finally meet you in person because we got already connected a few years ago in connection with our two-role project when you also gave a lecture at another conference workshop. So it's good to meet in person. And just a few personal words, I just said it in the break. For me now, after walking 2 days across the streets of the old city, it makes a huge difference to see all those photographs that you showed, Aaron, and to hear about Ramsey, and everything now connects together physically and mentally in my sometimes a little bit confused head. So it's such a good thing to be together here and to see, like to feel the history and to touch it and to smell it, and also the cats in the photograph. And at the same time, another cat was just passing by, saying hi to an ancestor cat. So, okay, Khalas. Let's go on. So, Dagmara, she's a proven expert on decorated Esther scrolls, and I know that she also wrote her dissertation about it, which then turned into a monograph about decorated, illuminated Esther scrolls. Thereby focusing on a mass production in northern Apennine Island, like Italy. So this was her main concern, starting her research that culminated in this dissertation. And since then, she offered and contributed her expertise on book culture, materiality, and book art mainly in two various research projects across Europe and also in Israel. And she published also several articles on that subject or related subject on materiality. And the latest article, and then the circle closes again, just appeared in a volume that was published by Annette in connection with an exhibition at the State Library in Berlin about Hebrew manuscripts that are from the treasure trove of the State Library, like medieval Hebrew manuscript showing book art and manuscript like culture and materiality. So her latest article can also be it's in German, but it's good to have you here in so many different forms. And currently you're located at Paris at the École Pratique des Hautes Études. So my French is even worse Spanish is worse, but and I think it's a big pulp project, like on those manuscripts. So, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to your lecture. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to this workshop that enabled me to enter a new field of Jewish manuscript studies. Today, I would like to explore the artistic and historical legacy of Jewish decorated manuscripts from 3 Greek islands and answer the question of what they reveal about the communities that produce them. Handwritten books have historically served as an essential tool for worship, education, and the preservation of communal memory. Today, their decorated examples stand as tangible witness to centuries of Jewish presence across Europe, reflecting the creativity of their makers and the taste of their time. Similarly, manuscripts from Greece possess an intriguing legacy, yet their history, production, and ornamentation haven't been studied and have rarely been discussed in scholarly debate. My presentation seeks to fill this gap, highlighting notable examples of Jewish book art from Greece, especially from three distant cities of Candia, Corfu, and Rhodes, where vibrant Jewish communities were once present. While these locations produce particularly remarkable examples of decorated manuscripts, it is notable that other areas in Greece, such as Thessaloniki, also created them. I will examine the visual and artistic features of manuscripts from these locales, which will enable me to discuss important information regarding religious devotion, spirituality, communal identity, and the interreactions among diverse groups living in the same locations during the early modern and modern periods. I would also emphasize some customs typical of the local communities. Jews residing in both the Greek mainland and the islands produced books during the medieval period, as is evidenced in scribal notes. Such an example is a prayer book dating back to 1426, which Aaron Hassan showed us in the previous session, whose colophon indicates its place of origin as Rhodes. Two more examples from Chios and Thebes are shown in this slide. Other manuscripts can be attributed to their geographical area and cultural context based on paleographic features, as those from this region represent a Byzantine style of Hebrew handwriting. However, it is noteworthy that in this area remained somewhat outside the mainstream of manuscript decoration. In contrast to the hundreds of decorated or illuminated codices from Ashkenazi and Sephardi milieus, no decorated examples from Greece have been identified until the 16th century. As Ilona Steinman, the next speaker in this session, says, I quote, "Hebrew manuscripts produced in the Byzantine Empire or on its former territories were almost never decorated. It seems that the Byzantine Jews deliberately avoided decoration in their manuscripts and consequently didn't create any illustrative tradition." End of quote. Notably, a significant period for Jewish book art in Greece began at the end of the 17th century in Corfu. Here, over the next several decades, a significant number of decorated handwritten books were produced, which outnumbered those from Candia and Rhodes. This trend, to some extent, was a consequence of the fact that the Hebrew printing emerged in Corfu only in the late 19th century. Simultaneously, a revival of manuscript production was observed in a different part of Europe, in German-speaking regions, where in cities like Vienna, Prague, or Hamburg, scribe artists created hundreds of lavishly decorated religious manuscripts. Many of these were luxurious volumes commissioned by affluent Jewish patrons, including court Jews. Nevertheless, as evidenced by stylistic differences and preferences for particular motifs, it seems likely that these movements in Greece and Germanic lands emerged and developed independently. The earliest decorated manuscripts from Greece that I'm familiar with were produced in Candia, modern-day Heraklion, the capital of Crete. This area has had a significant Jewish population since the Byzantine era. 4 ornate volumes from this location have been identified, all created during the Venetian rule of the island. These include 2 Passover Haggadot, a Machzor for Rosh Hashanah, and a copy of Pirkei Avot tractate. And in this place, I would like to express my gratitude to Ilona Steinman for bringing the letter to manuscripts to my attention, and also for sharing her unpublished article with me. Both Haggadot follow the Romaniot rite, reflecting the local communities, predominantly Romaniot population, which consists of Greek-speaking Jews from the Eastern Mediterranean. One of them is part of the collection at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris and is known as the Spaniolo Haggadah due to the name of its copies, Mattathias ben David Spaniolo. His colophon reveals that he completed the manuscript on July 13th, 1583, as a commission from Leon ben Judah Billy. However, the copies doesn't specify the place of creation, which scholars have inferred based on the personalities mentioned in the scribal note. Interestingly, Spaniolo was not the illustrator of this manuscript. Its visual elements are closely related to another Candia Haggadah known as Chantilly Haggadah, housed in Musée Condé in Chantilly. The artistic model can be traced back further, since as some details in this Haggadot are based on the so-called Brother Haggadah, a 14th century Catalan codex that arrived in Candia by early 15th century at the latest. Each of the Candia Haggadot is richly decorated with approximately 50 images, skillfully painted in a wide range of colors. In addition to illustrations directly related to the Passover celebrations and the Haggadah's narrative, such as the Seder table or the slaying of the Passover lamb, many images draw on biblical stories like the 3 angels at Abraham's table or extra biblical sources. It is evident that the artist was familiar with rabbinic commentaries and midrashic interpretations, and the illustrations were intended to enrich the text with additional interpretations. For example, in the margins of the Maggid section, there is a well-executed depiction of an angel that visually represents a rabbinic statement saying about God's direct involvement in the Exodus story. I quote, "Not by the hand of an angel, not by the hand of a seraph, not by the hand of a messenger, but the Holy One, blessed is He, in His glory and Himself brought us of Egypt." End of quote. Another fascinating detail appears just above the angel. The great power of God, declared in the text, is illustrated by an outstretched arm grasping a sword, referencing the verse that speaks of God's mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Although these Haggadot were intended to serve as liturgical guides for the Seder, their narrative scenes reveal some valuable details of the reality of Candia life during the 16th century, such as details of men's clothing. In several scenes, 2 of which I'm presenting in the slide, Jewish elderly men are depicted wearing a cappuccio. This headdress consists of a band that encircles the head with a long pointed sleeve attached at the top. It gained popularity in Italy during the 15th century and was worn by people of high social status, such as lawyers and physicians. And also, in this case, it is interesting that Rabbi Elia Kapsali, a community leader and historian living in the 16th century, stated that elders wore a cappuccio when attending synagogue, which confirms the accuracy of this depiction. As I have just mentioned, the patron of the Spaniolo Haggadah belonged to the Bili family, a wealthy family known to have been present in Crete as early as the 16th century. Its another member, Moshe ben Judah Bili, created the other two manuscripts from Candia, which are a Maxor for Rosh Hashanah and Pirkei Avot tractate. The Candia origin of the first of these manuscripts should be emphasized, as this festive prayer book is still catalogued as German. One important detail of these volumes is the significantly different handwriting, style, and palette compared to that of the Candia Haggadot. The colors are generally dark, especially in the Maxor, dominated by earth tones, primarily shades of green and brown. Notably, the faces of humans, angels, and mermaids are characterized by dark coloring, adding a striking detail to the illustrations. The Maxor dates back to 1614 and consists of 74 lavishly decorated paper leaves featuring charming albeit naive artwork. The decorations typically appear in the lower and outer margins, with 12 folios showcasing complete decorative patterns like those three I'm displaying in the slide. Common elements include floral borders inhabited by real and fantastic animals and mythological creatures such as mermaids, winged dragons, and unicorns. Battle scenes and marine themes accompany these images, yet the elements within this composition don't connect or relate to the text they adorn. The Pirkei Avot manuscript, created by Moshe Bili a year later in 1615 or 1616, shares stylistic and codical affinities with the prayer book, suggesting his coherent artistic approach. It is also adorned in a naive yet vibrant style, employing a limited palette of red, blue, green, and yellow ochre. As Ilona Steinman has pointed out, its visual vocabulary features a rich interplay of artistic traditions. It draws heavily from Cretan folk art and urban landscapes. Some patterns resemble densely packed embroideries with floral decorations, human figures, fantastic creatures, including, again, double-tailed mermaids. The fortress motif, likely inspired by the Venetian fortifications, further situates the manuscript within its local context, and notably, it also appears in the Maxor. Furthermore, Bili's symmetrical carpet decorations seem to be influenced by Ottoman textiles, while the depiction of the celestial sphere appears as a borrowing from European printed books, especially those printed by Abraham ibn Usk in Ferrara in the 16th century. This imagery, along with the Wheel of Fortune, demonstrated on another page, highlights Moshe Billy's engagement with philosophical and scientific concepts from the early modern world. Therefore, this cross-cultural artistic synthesis reveals not only his creativity but also his interests. In contrast to Candia, where only a handful of manuscripts have been identified, a prominent center for the production of handwritten books emerged in Corfu during the late 17th and 18th centuries. The Jewish presence in the city has been documented here since the Middle Ages, reaching its peak in the 1860s, when the local community numbered nearly 6,000 people. The Jews of Corfu developed a unique religious rite and customs of their own. Notable works from this period include small liturgical manuscripts written on paper and richly illustrated with biblical scenes. Typical, albeit quite mysterious for them, is emphasis on the Samson story, which was more visible in European than Jewish art. The relatively large number and depictions of scenes that are rare in Jewish art set Corfu's manuscripts apart from those produced simultaneously in Central Europe. Notably, the earliest known example of these motifs appear in Jacob Farrell's self-made prayer book from 1692. In addition to other decoration, his manuscript features a cycle of 9 full-page biblical illustrations, and 3 of them depict scenes of Samson's extraordinary strength. They are Samson battling a lion with his bare hands, carrying the gates of the city of Gaza, and using the jawbone of a donkey against the Philistines. This prayer book may have inspired another artist around 1760 who created a booklet comprising a selection of prayers and piyutim recited on Sabbath afternoons between Passover and Shavuot, illustrated with similar themes, including the scenes of Samson carrying the gates of Gaza and raising a donkey's jawbone. Additionally, a Machzor for Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot from 1709 revisits the Samson theme and portrays him fighting a lion, but it also adds a rare depiction of his parents sacrificing to God upon being promised they will have a child. The already mentioned volume from around 1760, beyond its artistic appeal, serves as a significant testament to the complex social structure of the community, as it includes Hebrew poems alongside those written in Judeo-Greek and Judeo-Spanish. The region's stormy history has contributed to a dynamic Jewish experience. Over the years, many Jews from various backgrounds, particularly those from the Italian and Iberian peninsulas, settled in Corfu. This influx of newcomers led to social diversity, which resulted in disagreements and conflicts among different groups within the community and created religious tensions. One notable dispute regarding the social structure in Corfu is reflected in a lavishly illustrated manuscript titled Università Italiana della Sinagoga Corfiota Aborigine contro Università della Sinagoga Corfiota Greca. It was created in 1674 in Venice, and the text is written in Latin, Italian, and the local dialect. This document arose from a disagreement between the smaller Greek community, which sought seniority privileges, and the larger, more diverse Italian community that included Iberian refugees. Delegates from both groups presented their cases before the Venetian Council, ultimately leading the Doge to recognize the historical significance of both communities. The booklet contains 14 pages which are richly decorated in Italian style. Its colorful border showcases a stylistic relationship with the borders within another manuscript, the Harrison Miscellany, which dates back to around 1720. Also, this stunning manuscript from the Braginski collection reflects the customs of Corfu, intertwined with Italian art, which is understandable as the island was the protectorate of the Republic of Venice for 4 centuries until 1797. It contains prayers, blessings, and poems for weddings from various authors, including Rabbi Eliezer de Mordo, a member of a prominent family in the city. This miscellany is an outstanding example of book art due to its unique cycle of 60 high-quality and full-page gouache illustrations from Genesis, likely painted by a non-Jewish artist trained in Venice. Also, the illustrations don't directly correlate with the text. The depictions of wedding scenes based on biblical stories, along with frequent portrayals of women, suggest that this impressive manuscript may have been commissioned as a wedding gift for a bride. And this manuscript introduces us to wedding art represented by decorated marriage contracts, which are the most numerous among illuminated manuscripts from Greece. These contracts were created in both Romaniot and Sephardic communities, with many produced during the late 18th, 19th, and even the first half of the 20th centuries. The richness of their ornamentations and the stories behind these unique legal documents offer valuable insights into social practices and local customs. As observed in previous manuscripts, the influence of Italian aesthetics is no less evident in many ketubot from Corfu. For instance, a contract prepared in 1725 for the wedding of Moses Maza and Stamu Vivante, 2 members of the Corfu Romaniot community, showcases an artistic vocabulary similar to that found in Italy. This ketubah features a lavishly decorated border adorned with satyrs, reclining female nudes, winged cherubs, zodiac signs, and 2 biblical scenes. Beyond reflecting the tastes of the local Jewish community, it also provides insights into its marriage customs. Notably, in the lower part of the document, on the left side, a note unique to Romaniot marriage contracts appears. It was customary for the groom to provide a signed note attesting to the bride's virginity, which in this case was added 5 days after the wedding. Another significant aspect of Romaniot contracts is the method of dating, which communities rooted in the Byzantine Jewish tradition followed. Traditionally, these documents were dated using a system that began with the year of the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE. However, rabbinical sources indicate a different traditional date for this event due to that 67 or 68 years should be added to this count. For example, in the Corfu ketubah from the Gross Family Collection, currently on display, the wedding day is recorded as 1763, which actually corresponds to 1830. This document further reiterates the date as the year counted from the creation of the world. Another notable center for the production of decorated marriage contracts was in Rhodes. According to the Jewish Museum in New York, Rhodes, and here I quote, became an important center for ketubah illumination and Jewish ceremonial art production. Wealthy members of Jewish community invested considerable sums in weddings, resulting in many exquisite examples of ketubot. End of quote. The museum houses a magnificent example prepared in 1843 for the wedding of Chaim Yosef Tarika and Joya Israel, both descendants of prominent Jewish families in Rhodes. Several significant details about this contract stand out. First, it is written on paper, unlike most Sephardi and Italian ketubot, which are typically made of parchment. Additionally, its impressive size measures over 80 centimeters in height and 54 centimeters in width, and the decorations that cover most of the surface dominating the text. The main motif, which is unique to this contract, features a building with tall, slender, minaret-like towers, and lastly, the majority of the text is inscribed in a minuscule cursive script.
I'm sorry, is it still this slide?
So this is the ketubah of 1725 with this very Italian border. The next one, I choose this ketubah because it has the date is repeated. It's given twice according to two systems, and it's also decorated in very different style, and also the palette is very different than the previous one, and this is this beautiful ketubah, this very large from Jewish Museum in New York, and I think it's also related to two of ketubot that Aaron showed us before. We can see the same proportions. I think at least 60% of the surface is covered with decorations, and the rest is dedicated for the text, which basically is the most important thing, because it is still a legal document and not only a beautiful manuscript. And I don't know if it's visible, but the handwriting is different. I mean, there is a square and cursive script in this ketubah. And let's try. Okay. Another magnificent ketubah from Rhodes is adorned with a lithographed border that has been colored with watercolor. While the border is printed on paper, the verses and decorative elements in the upper and lower registers are hand-painted. And significantly, the same design can be found in 3 contracts from different and distant places: Rhodes, Dalaman in Turkey, and the United States, all prepared for weddings that took place over a span of 17 years. And the final ketubah I choose is noteworthy not for its artistic value, but for its historical significance, and also today's day of remembrance, as this contract commemorates the wedding of Abraham and Esther, which occurred on May 26, 1944 in Corfu, which means just 2 weeks before the deportation of local Jews, which began on June 9th. Therefore, I see it symbolically as the last witness to the 700-year presence of the Jewish community in Corfu, and more generally of all Jewish communities in Greece. And to conclude, Jewish decorated manuscripts from Rhodes, Corfu, and Candia exhibit a fusion of artistic influences, and they also facilitated the transmission of faith, preservation of liturgical traditions and local customs, and also reinforced communal pride and continuity. Their visual and textual narratives enable unheard Jewish life amid stormy political and changing social landscapes. And therefore, I think that the study of them contributes to a deeper understanding of the diversity of Jewish communities in Greece and their complex history. Thank you.
Yes, it's so beautiful. Thank you. Actually, I have a few questions. I'll try to keep it short. First of all, do you know who those painters were, and was there like some kind of a school that made the 3 islands you're talking about especially, I don't know, important or significant in this sense? My other question is, I saw birds and flowers in Jewish ornamentation, but depictions of real life person in prayer books, and even this erotic depiction is very unique. Was it well accepted everywhere?
Okay, so starting from the first question, in general, we don't know the names of the artists who created the manuscripts. So in general, even if there are notes, there are the notes by scribes and not by artists. Sometimes we can have signatures or something that makes that we can recognize the artist. For example, in this Harrison miscellany, there are initials. On some pages there are initials, but so far we weren't able to connect those initials with an artist. So this is very difficult question. In many cases, I think, like I showed a prayer book created by Jacob Farrell. I think it was created for himself. It was very widespread trend in Jewish book culture to produce books for your personal use. And I think this is the case, and I think we can say that he was also the illuminator, he was also the artist. And I think in many cases it was also like this. But in general it is very, very difficult as there are no signatures. I know this is not related to our presentation, but this is a magnificent example of co-production and correlation of Jewish and European art, when we have printed border for Esther scrolls that is signed by non-Jewish artist, and the text was written by Jewish scribe who also signed them. So, but this is a real exception. And the other question was
Depiction of humans.
like naked.
Everything that's Besel Tmuna, everything that's depicting actual things that might be mistaken for gods or being worshipped as such.
Okay, so I can tell you that I studied Esther scrolls, decoration of Esther scrolls, and we can find some even more naked depictions. One is really, I think, even from the point of view of us living in the 21st century, I think is
Pornographic.
yeah, somehow, yeah. So this is
scroll itself.
this is in the scroll itself, and it accompanies the book of Esther, which is still a biblical book, and it's read during the holiday. So I can't explain this because there are this is not so rare as we could expect.
But in Esther 1, the name of God is not inside.
Yeah, agree, but yeah, but this is, I think this is not the explanation why you need to show like unclothed female figures. You can show like 1 million other motifs, but not this one. Even, yeah, that's true. There is no name of God, but
No explanation.
yeah.
Well, there's a trick, the Hamelech thing on the Esther scroll, which indicates like God is still there.
Yeah, and also in some scrolls, but mainly from Ashkenaz, there are letters that are indicated, that are somehow highlighted to show the presence, like symbolical presence of God in the narrative. But as for the depictions, it is weird, and I can't explain this.
And you also didn't find any rabbinical writings condemning it, or that, like, was there any debate on that?
Honestly, I don't know. And I can just tell you that, for example, also this motif that I stressed in my presentation, I mean mermaids. It also appears in Esther scrolls, and it also appears like in Hanukkah lamps from Italy. And I can't explain this. Why mermaids? and they're always like with double tails. I don't know why.
It was like freestyle of the artist. It was no meaning inside. It was like the artist did what they want.
Sometimes I think so. Sometimes I think there was no plan. It was just to let's say create something beautiful, and we need to remember that in many cases it was just an object, just object for trade, and it wasn't. Sometimes it was a work of art, for sure, but sometimes it was like to finish it as soon as possible and sell, because those people need to earn money, to just a simple economy of production manuscripts. But sometimes they're absolutely beautiful, and sometimes the decorations are well planned, and sometimes I'm absolutely sure that the ornamentation was clear for the people, let's say in the 17th, 18th centuries, but now we can't understand, we can't interpret, we can't we can't enter deep enough to understand the meaning. So I think it's a very complex issue, and this presentation, it was just to notice some important issues.
It's not really a question, it's simply a comment to thank you, a comment of gratitude. The issue with Candia, for someone, I've studied a lot on the Jewish history of Greece, but the issue of Candia that you brought up was really, in my case, excellent, because it opened up so many things which I didn't know. And what I appreciated is the fact that you bring out that the local kind of imperial context also plays a role. If I can understand, if you understand what I mean. In other words, we see in Islamic art the use of winged creatures, mythological creatures, and it's not unusual, I think, that would be absorbed by Jewish artists, if they were Jewish, that made them, or the general artistic environment. I think that's very, very important. And the use of minarets in the ketubah, these kind of Islamic motifs. And in Greek folklore, we see the mermaid quite a lot. And in the island folklore, even to this day. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in my presentation, I wanted to avoid words such as borrowings. Because I think it was not only for the Jews in Greece, but in general. I think it was typical for Jewish art to use everything they saw like around them. Yeah. In the streets, in books, and in the buildings, like decorations of the buildings, like everywhere. So that's why I try to avoid of using word borrowings, because in this case I think it was natural for them to use the motifs that they know.
They were open for other cultures at that time.
Yeah.
Well, the use of the celestial globe, which was taken directly from, or taken, the influence from the West was important. And Crete was really a kind of bridge, literally.
Exactly.
About the Venetian occupation in the middle of the East
and West.
Exactly.
And also,
Greco was born there, and kind of overstating it. The famous Spanish artist who Greek artist.
And also we need to remember about merchants who appeared in islands, and later they traveled and they can and also the motifs, the decorations and books traveled together with them. And as I've just mentioned the example of this Brother Haggadah, that was a Sephardic manuscript that was here in Greece, and it is also important.
Is there a difference between the way that it was illustrated in the big cities and in the islands? In the islands was more freedom than in the cities, or it's all over so eclectic?
I don't know, because I didn't compare this. I choose those three cities because they are very distant, so it was like the first thing, and the other that it was my personal attitude. I found those manuscripts are especially captivating as also highlights of Jewish book art. So I don't know, and this is also something that we need to stress, that there is no serious research on Jewish decorated manuscript from Greece, and this is the new field that we can enter. So I'm sorry, I can.
Right. So
Well, you provided a very
Sorry,
good
there's one question.
Sorry.
Good starting point, I think.
Starting
It's
point.
a question of gratitude. I'm grateful for this.
Yeah, I think it's just a starting point, and to show that,
There's a lot to
There's a
it.
lot there.
and also the quality of the depictions. Sometimes we can say they are naive, and they don't fit our sense of aesthetics today, but
Maybe at that time.
yeah, I think at the time it must be beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really fantastic. I have one question and one small comment about the mermaid. I'm from America, which is a relatively new country, and so our folklore is much younger than the folklore of Greece or Germany or any country in Europe. But I did a small research in the library of a whaling town in America, and all the towns, all the locations that are islands, even in North America, and or even a peninsula or an isthmus, they all have a lot of folklore and many superstitions about mermaids, and all the art from the sailors always included, mermaids. So I think maybe you brought it to me that it's maybe universal for it's Corfu and Rhodes and Crete. These are all seafaring people, and Jews or non-Jews, and so there's always the influence of the sea motif. But my question was, you mentioned the inclusion in the very interesting prayer book. You showed the illustration of 1692 with Samson, and you said, I think you said it also had the Hebrew, and then it had Judeo-Greek and Judeo-Spanish. And I was wondering, did you see in your studies any other manuscripts where there were two or more languages, not just the Hebrew text?
Okay, so I think your question relates to another manuscript from 1760.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, so in general, there are manuscripts that join different languages. But as for Greece, this was also this manuscript about the debate.
Okay.
So it was also written in different languages, and it's also in Latin alphabet, not in Hebrew alphabet. And if there are any others, For now, I don't remember. Like in general, yes. Like in from Europe, for example, but from Greece, I don't remember now. And here, if I may ask a question, if you know any reason, any explanation for this Samson theme that was so beloved.
A wild guess. I think it probably has to do with some feeling of being persecuted, because Samson is the raw power, is like the golem.
Agree.
Yeah, just a brutal, violent Jew who just makes justice by using power. So my guess would be that it has to do. It has something to do with the state of being persecuted.
My other proposition was also that it's a kind of influence of the myth of Hercules.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's something really special, and it was also, I didn't mention this in my presentation, but there was a wonderful exhibition in New York. I think it was in 2023, at the end of the year, at the JTS in New York. And it was like two institutions, I mean JTS and Columbia University joined, and they gathered manuscripts, not only manuscripts, also printed books from Corfu. And I was then in New York because of my research trip, and I remember when I entered the library, the JTS library, and I saw all of those manuscripts behind the glass, and I said to myself, I have no idea that in Corfu it was this kind of production of decorated manuscripts. And it was a real discovery for me, and that's why I decided to include Corfu in this presentation. And I think it's really something unusual, even if we have, as I mentioned, even if we are aware of a similar trend in Central Europe, I think it's something absolutely amazing that a similar trend appeared in a different part of Europe.
Yes, I think it's possible that is largely a Venetian influence, because the Venetians were very advanced in their printing of illuminated works and books.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Absolutely.
the printers were many from Venice.
Absolutely, but still, I think it's very important to show this, that even in the age of print, handwritten books were still produced in Jewish culture.
I'm asking that because I don't know, but was Corfu wealthier? I mean, would there have been more means for people to be able to afford this kind of work?
For sure, for sure.
Would explain it also.
It differs from the rest of the Greek world historically because it was a feudal society. It had landlords and it had people with large estates, which if you cross the water into the rest of Greece, it was under Ottoman rule, and there wasn't that kind of system of land ownership. There was the kind of aristocracy which developed there, and with it an element of wealthy Jews as well that lived, and they could have been patrons of these kinds of items.
Yes.
But getting back to your point about you were surprised, if I understood correctly, when you went into the JTS, I think that's got to do with the anthropology and the sociology of Jewish studies. In other words, that it's Sephardic items and Romanian items were, in a sense, the poor relatives, or how do I put it, it was the poor kind of family members of the Jewish family. They were less studied and less admired and less, and their culture was less kind of considered to be worthy of study, if that makes sense. There was a kind of prejudice there, and that's been around for many years amongst scholars of Jewish studies, I think.
Compared to Ashkenazi.
Yeah, definitely so. And if I can make a criticism of Israel, and it's got to do with it, that also had to do with the place of Sephardis within Israeli society, and the fact that after 48, Israel became the center of so much study of the Jewish world and Jewish history, that a predominance of Ashkenazic themes and subjects and topics took over. And only, I think, in the 1980s and 1990s, things changed a bit more. That's not an absolute opinion, but I think that was a general tendency. And now I'm going to say nothing. That's it.
I totally understand. It's really hard to stop here. But we have other chances to continue talking about the thing. I'm very glad that art,
coffee break.
yes, that art attracts so much attention. I'm really happy about it. And so we move on now.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Dagmara.